Last year, I was on a road trip, planning to be away for a few days. On the second night, I found myself in the middle of nowhere, not sure where I'd sleep. I hoped to find a hotel, but as I kept driving, it seemed like I was getting farther from any towns. My phone's service kept cutting out too, making it harder to check for places to stay. By around 11 p.m., I pulled into a rest area and tried to find nearby hotels. The closest option was a motel about 12 miles away, and even though I was tired, I decided to go for it. The motel was small and old, and the town it was in didn't seem to have much. The building gave me a creepy vibe. It had maybe 10 or 12 rooms, all on one level, and an office attached to the side. The parking lot was nearly empty when I arrived, and the place looked like something straight out of a horror movie. But it was cheap, just $29 for the night, so I figured it'd do since I'd be out of there early in the morning. I went into the office, where a man with a long beard was sitting behind the counter. He barely looked at me when I asked for a room. I handed over the $29, got a key, and headed to my room. When I walked in, the room was exactly what I expected, outdated and not very clean. The furniture was old, and the TV was one of those ancient box ones, but I wasn't going to complain. I just wanted to sleep. So, I got ready for bed and lay down. I'd been lying there for only a couple of minutes when I started to drift off, but then I had this strange feeling like something wasn't right. I opened my eyes and turned over to face the window. That's when I saw someone moving away from it. It wasn't like they were just passing by. It seemed like they had been looking in. I couldn't make out who it was, but it freaked me out. I got up and closed the curtains, but they were cheap and didn't cover the whole window. They were so thin you could almost see through them, but it was better than nothing. I looked outside, but whoever was there was already gone. Trying to shake it off, I went back to bed, though I wasn't as relaxed as before. I was still tired, so after a bit, I managed to calm down enough to start dozing off again. Then, that uneasy feeling came back. This time I was already facing the window, so I opened my eyes and, sure enough, I saw someone standing there again. At first, it was hard to tell because of the curtains, but I saw a man's head for just a second before he moved away. I couldn't tell who he was, and it was too dark to see much, but it was definitely someone. Now I was really freaked out. I got up and looked out the window again, but the person had disappeared. My door was locked, and I tried to cover the window as best as I could, but I still didn't feel safe. I tried to convince myself to go back to sleep, but it took me a long time to relax. I don't know how long I'd been asleep when I woke up to the sound of my door squeaking open. It was an old, cheap door, so it made a lot of noise. Instantly, I was wide awake. I sat up and saw a man coming into my room. At first, I had no idea who it was, but as soon as he saw me, he ran out the door. That's when I realized. It was the guy from the front desk. I jumped out of bed, packed up my stuff as fast as I could, and got out of there. I drove back onto the highway and found a rest area where I slept in my car for the rest of the night. As crazy as it sounds, I felt a lot safer in my car than I had in that motel. The next morning, I tried to call the motel to report the guy, but they hung up on me as soon as I started to explain what happened. So, I called the police and told them about it. I don't know what they did, but that guy was a total creep. I'm really glad I woke up when I did, because I don't want to think about what he might have been planning. I just hope he doesn't do that to anyone else. Back in the summer of 2010, when I was just becoming a teenager, my family took a trip to a fancy hotel in the city. I don't remember why we went, but a lot of my family and some friends were there, staying in rooms near ours. I've never asked my parents why we went, but it didn't seem important at the time. Now I've always been a bit of a scaredy cat. I was a skinny, fragile kid who got spooked easily, and that still happens sometimes. But what happened in that hotel wasn't just me freaking out. It was way more than that. The hotel itself was pretty weird. The lobby was on the 4th floor, which seemed strange to me, and the only way to get there was by elevator. You couldn't use the stairs to reach it. The whole place was shaped like a square, with balconies on each floor where you could look down at the lobby and cafe below. I was always nervous walking near the balcony, worried I might fall over, but the railing was high enough to keep me from freaking out too much. The first couple of days were fun. My friends and I played cards and watched TV. At night, we explored the halls of the hotel, telling ghost stories and just having a good time. I didn't fully understand why we were there, but I didn't care much either. On the third day, though, things got weird. I woke up early to the sound of screaming outside my room. The hotel's design made noises from the lobby echo up to the top floors, so I went out to the balcony to see what was going on. Down in the lobby, I saw a girl lying on the ground with eggs and milk splattered everywhere. People were rushing to help her, and some were yelling for someone to call the cops. The girl looked unconscious. I saw my family down in the lobby getting breakfast, so I decided to head down to meet them and find out what happened. The elevator was on the opposite side of my floor, so I took the stairs, which were right next to my room. We were staying on the 7th or 8th floor, so I figured I'd just take a few flights down. As I went down the stairs, I was expecting to find the 4th floor, but I kept going without seeing any doors. I passed the 5th floor, but there was still no sign for the lobby. I kept walking, thinking I'd missed something, but then I realized I'd gone way past the 3rd and 2nd floors too. By now I should have turned back, but I didn't want to climb all those stairs again, so I kept going. At the bottom, I found myself in a cold, dimly lit room with concrete floors and cinder block walls. There were double doors in front of me, and I figured they might lead back to the lobby, so I opened them and stepped inside. It was like a huge storage room, probably the size of a basketball court. The only light came from the stairwell behind me, so I couldn't see much. I assumed it was just part of the hotel's storage. In the back of the room, I noticed an elevator. It looked bigger than the others, so I walked over to it, hoping it would take me back up. But when I pressed the button, nothing happened. There was a card swiper next to it, so I figured it was for employees only. Disappointed, I turned back to the stairwell door. That's when I realized it was locked. Panic started to set in. I didn't have a phone, because my parents wouldn't let me have one until I graduated middle school, so I had no way to call for help. Everyone probably thought I was still asleep in my room, and I was starting to freak out. I searched the warehouse, hoping to find another way out, but everything was locked. I started to cry, scared out of my mind. It felt like I was stuck there for hours, but in reality, only a few minutes passed before I heard a door creak open. It wasn't the stairwell door. It was another door on the opposite side of the room. A slim, middle-aged man in a lab coat stepped through the door. At the time, I didn't question why someone in a lab coat was in a hotel. I was just relieved to see an adult. I ran over to him, tears in my eyes, and explained that I'd gotten lost and locked in the basement. I asked if he had a key, but he didn't answer. Instead, he told me he knew a way out and asked me to follow him. He seemed nervous, and even though the room was dimly lit, I could see sweat on his forehead. He kept looking around like he wasn't sure where he was. We walked past the stairwell, and I started to feel uneasy. The man seemed lost, checking his surroundings like it was his first time there. We turned a corner and walked toward a bunch of boxes, leading to a dead end. That's when I froze. Something felt very wrong. I asked him, "Where are we going?" He just told me to keep following him, but I knew there were no doors where we were headed. I'd already checked that area. Then a thought hit me. I started screaming as loud as I could. The man got irritated, plugging his ears and yelling at me to stop, but I kept screaming, not knowing what else to do. Eventually, he snapped and started walking toward me quickly. I bolted for the stairwell door, hoping by some miracle it would open. He didn't run after me, just muttered things like, "Stupid kid," as he walked behind me. Just as I reached the door, it flew open. A janitor came through, hearing my screams from the stairwell. He saw me and the man in the lab coat and immediately told me to get behind him. The janitor asked who the man was, and I said I didn't know. The janitor quietly radioed for help, mentioning that the man came from outside. The guy in the lab coat started making excuses, saying he was just looking for a bathroom, but the janitor wasn't buying it. He told him to wait for security. Eventually, an employee from the front desk showed up and took me back to the lobby, where I met up with my family. They hadn't even realized I was missing. I never found out who that man was or what he was doing there, but I'm so thankful for that janitor. I still don't know what the guy in the lab coat was planning, but I'm glad I trusted my instincts and started screaming. A few years ago, I was driving down an old highway late at night for work. They didn't fly me out, so I had to drive, but at least I'd get reimbursed. I don't love long drives, but I was making good time and ended up passing the city where I'd planned to stop for the night. By then, I didn't know when I'd hit the next decent-sized city with a hotel. By midnight, I was getting tired, but realized I was about 5 hours ahead of schedule. I pulled off the highway to get gas and saw a sign for an old motel down the road. It didn't look great, but I was too tired to care, so I decided to give it a shot. The motel was pretty basic, just 2 levels with rooms facing the parking lot. I got a room on the first floor, way at the end. When I went inside, I was surprised. It wasn't as bad as I expected. The bed was comfortable, the room was clean, and there was a decent-sized TV. After a shower, I lay down and turned on the TV to relax for a bit before falling asleep. About 30 minutes later, there was a sudden knock on the door. It felt strange, but I wasn't too worried. I got up, opened the door, and saw a man standing there. He was tall, skinny, with long hair and a beard. His speech was slurred, and I could tell he'd been drinking. He asked if he could come inside, just for a few minutes. I wasn't about to let a stranger into my room, so I told him no and shut the door. After closing it, I could tell he was still standing outside. I went back to bed, hoping he'd leave, but after about 30 seconds, he knocked again. This time, I yelled at him to go away. I looked out the window and saw him walking off down the sidewalk. I figured he was gone, but about 5 minutes later, I saw movement out of the corner of my eye. He was back, and this time he had something in his hand, some kind of pipe. Without warning, he swung it at my window, making a loud noise. The glass didn't break right away, but after a few more hits, I heard it shatter. At that moment, I realized this guy was dangerous. I grabbed my phone, keys, and wallet, then ran to the bathroom and locked myself in. I could hear him smashing things in the room, hitting the TV, the walls, and other stuff. I called the police and told them what was happening. They said they'd be there as soon as possible, but I was terrified he'd break down the bathroom door before they arrived. He kept hitting things in the room, then came back toward the bathroom and hit the door a few times. Thankfully, it held up. After a minute, I heard sirens in the distance, but they didn't seem to scare him. The police finally arrived and I heard them yelling at the guy to stop. It felt like forever, but they eventually got him under control. When I came out, the room was a mess. He'd destroyed pretty much everything. Luckily, he didn't hurt anyone. I had to get a new room, and the rest of the night was uneventful. The next morning, I got back on the road, but that was definitely the craziest hotel experience I've ever had. This past summer, I had a strange experience while staying at a hotel just outside a big city. The hotel was pretty nice, nicer than most places I'd stayed before. After checking in, I left the hotel and didn't come back until around 10 p.m. that night. My room was on the second floor, and when I got to my door, I realized I didn't have my key. I must have lost it somewhere. I went down to the front desk, explained the situation, and got a new key. After that, I headed back to my room, got ready for bed, and fell asleep pretty quickly since I was exhausted. Not long after falling asleep, I woke up to the sound of my door handle turning. Half asleep, I was confused. I thought maybe I was imagining things, but then I heard the door creak open. It was strange because it was almost midnight and there was no reason for anyone to be entering my room. From where I was lying in bed, I couldn't see the door because the bathroom was between me and the entrance. I got up to check, but by the time I walked over, the door had already closed, and no one was there. It felt creepy, but I thought maybe it was just a mistake or someone trying to get into the wrong room. I looked through the peephole, but the hallway was empty. I was about to go back to bed when something caught my eye. As I glanced toward the bathroom, I saw a figure standing in the dark. Someone was in there, looking right at me. My heart sank, and I panicked. Without thinking, I bolted for the door, ran down the hallway, and headed straight for the lobby. When I got to the front desk, I told the clerk someone had been in my room. They came back up with me to check, but when we got there, the person was gone. I didn't feel safe staying in that room, so I asked for another one, and luckily, they had an empty room on the 3rd floor. I moved all my stuff and stayed there for the rest of the night. Thinking back on it, I'm pretty sure I dropped my key somewhere, and whoever found it used it to get into my room. Instead of walking in right away, they hid in the bathroom. I'm just glad I saw them before it was too late and was able to switch rooms. It was definitely one of the creepiest experiences I've ever had. A few years ago, I was traveling alone. I flew to Vegas for some business and planned to stay for 2 nights. I booked a standard hotel just outside of downtown. It wasn't anything fancy, but it wasn't too cheap either. Just a regular room with a bed, TV, desk, and bathroom. After I checked in, I went to my room, used my laptop for a while, and then went out for a few hours to explore the city. When I came back later that night, I entered my room and set my stuff down like normal. That's when I saw him. A man stood up from behind my bed. I had no idea who he was. He was bald, had a goatee, and was wearing a black, sleeveless shirt and jeans. I asked him, "What are you doing in here?" But he didn't say anything. Instead, he started walking slowly toward me. Panicked, I backed up and made a dash for the door. He chased after me, but I managed to get out of the room and into the hallway. I ran down toward the front doors, and by the time I reached the lobby, I realized he wasn't following me anymore. I went straight to the front desk and told the employee what had happened. She said she'd call the police, so I waited in the lobby until they arrived. It took about 10 minutes, and the whole time we didn't see the guy again. When the police arrived, they searched my room, but he was gone. They checked the whole hotel, but he had probably left through a back exit. I was relieved to find that none of my belongings were stolen, but the whole thing was still really creepy. After the police left and everything quieted down, I was back in my room alone. About an hour later, I glanced out the window, which looked out onto the back parking lot. There weren't many cars there, and the lot backed up to a few nearby businesses. That's when I saw the man again. He was walking from the hotel parking lot to one of the nearby businesses and then disappeared from view. I thought about reporting it, but I figured by the time anyone got there, he'd be long gone. That night, I made sure my door was locked and my window was covered. The rest of my stay was fine, and I never saw him again, but I still wonder what he was doing in my room and how he got in there. It's possible he was hiding there the whole time, or maybe he came in after I left. I guess I'll never know.